The following is a recording of a presentation by Andrea Bodnari of Tech Solutions for Visual Independence held on October 21st, 2012. The purpose of this meeting is entirely related to iOS. Andrea Bodnari, who is an associate of URable in Pennsylvania. She's a fully accredited educator for the blind with focus on children and adults. She's doing some really neat things with our products in primary education, which is the core of hers and my connection. But she's also an avid, if not fanatical, iOS fan, and in particular the benefits that are brought to children. She was a recent guest speaker at the SOMA conference, the O&M conference in Virginia, and from that generated quite a bit of buzz. In dialogue with Andrea, I said, well, I have a group of friends that are really keenly interested in iOS. Would you be willing to share that presentation? I'd like to introduce Andrea and give her the helm.
Okay. Hi, I'm Andrea, over here in Pennsylvania, that services children with blindness and low vision. I do orientation and mobility, as well as teacher the visually impaired. And I've done some low vision rehabilitation training over at Salus University. But due to my time constraints and 3 children, I just didn't have time to get my student teaching in and have a certification in that. But what I was able to do is I've been working with a student since kindergarten right now on iOS devices. And with the iOS device, she uses an iPad, and she also uses the Refresher Braille 18. And it's been excellent for her. And in my research of different apps for her, by developing this presentation for the SOMA conference, I think that everyone's probably gotten a outline of some of the apps that I have presented. I'm going to kind of skip the outline and talk about the ones that I like best at this particular moment, because I think that, as Rob mentioned, the population I'm kind of dealing with is not low vision, but without vision. So I want to talk about some of the apps that I'm using that don't require vision right now that I'm using for orientation and mobility. The first one that I really like is this Look-Tell Recognizer. When I talk about the Look-Tell Recognizer, if anyone's familiar with that app, it's really advertised as a app that goes ahead and we use for barcode scanning. In terms of like a barcode scanner, it doesn't give me the kind of information I need. It doesn't have as large of a database. But what I am able to do with this Look-Tell Recognizer is I'm using it for indoor orientation and mobility training for my students. And the reason that I'm using this particular app called the Look-Tell Recognizer is because it will allow me to take pictures of landmarks that usual sighted people or low vision students would be able to see. So I can actually take a picture of a landmark and then have that information talk back to me or to my students to give them information about where they are. The reason that I use this app in this way is because most of our general problems when it comes to GPS systems, especially indoors, is lack of signal. So we don't necessarily have a GPS signal. We don't necessarily have a Wi-Fi signal. But with the Look-Tell Recognizer, you don't really need that. So what I do for my students is I actually go throughout the entire building and I kind of take pictures in open spaces. And you can imagine learning orientation mobility, you're in an open space, and where do you need to go? And you're stuck in this space and you don't really have any auditory clues about which plan of action you should need to take. So what I'm able to do is take pictures of, say, the auditorium, or take pictures of something, even like a ramp, pictures down the hallway. And as my students come into an open space, I will drop them off and say, where are you and how do you get to where you need to go? And what I found is that with my students who need a lot of encouraging in terms of they definitely know their route, but their pace slows and they need to slow down because they're waiting for me to give them that verbal confirmation of, yeah, you're going the right way. And how I found it to really work from some of my students who have some cognitive abilities for like route travelers is that my student, like Haley, who's in 5th grade, who's 12, who has a speech impediment, who's also blind, and also has some cognitive impairments, is that by dropping off Haley in a blank space, an area where there's really nothing that she's going to get information from and she's going to wander, she will stop, make a series of quarter turns, and wait for the Look-Tell Recognizer to give her information about where she is in time and space and which direction she needs to go to. And I really think that this Look-Tell Recognizer is going to be huge. I know that Look-Tell, as an organization, is developing a new application called Breadcrumbs, which I can't wait to for it to come out so I can figure out how it works. But what I'm doing with the Looktel Recognizer is I can create landmarks because I work in a district called Ephrata. And there's several buildings in that district called Ephrata, and I have at least 3 students in that district, and all 3 of my students are using the Looktel Recognizer. So as my students are going around and they're taking pictures of landmarks, they're actually able to go ahead and share that information with someone else in the district. And then when they come into that district, that same landmark that my students have set is going to give information to my other students that have never been in the building, who don't know information about that. So it's been pretty profound in terms of using that Looktel Recognizer in a different way, and that's how I'm using the majority of my apps in a different way to kind of give them information about where they go and where they are. And before I think I've kind of hit the gist of the Looktel Recognizer and kind of how I'm using it, and I'd ask if anyone has any questions about how I'm using it before I kind of travel on to the next app that I'm using for O&M.
And I have a question for you. Are the children holding your iOS device in their hand, or are they wearing it in some way?
Actually, I tried holding it, and I found that because they're younger, like their wrist control and actually targeting an object isn't working that well. So I do actually have, like our typical layers around their neck. So they're actually putting the iPod around their neck, very similar to like a necklace almost, and the camera is just pointing out. So yeah, it's actually attached to them. Now, my older students are actually able to hold it and point it in their hand, but with the population I'm currently using it primarily for, they are actually wearing it around their neck. And Alana is 6, and Haley is, again, I think 11 or 12 at this point. But my high school students who use it, and Tony, my adult friend who actually works with me, actually will hold it in his hand and turn it. So it doesn't have to be, but I mean, as long as that kid has the concept, or the adult has the concept of pointing it directly in front of them, or at least turning it in front of their body, then it seems to work out. But I found that the wrist control of my younger students and their perception of how it's targeted wasn't consistent enough. So, yeah, I did put it around their neck. I also learned that when I'm making targets for my students, that I really have to make those targets set to their perspective. So if they're going ahead and they're wearing it around their neck at a certain height, then I actually need to set my landmarks for them at that specific height so that it'll pick it up. But even with the landmarks that I'm setting with Looktel Recognizer, I can pretty much set a landmark or a target, an informational cue, in a blank hallway with pretty much no signs, no nothing. It can be pretty much white or brick, and it does a fairly good job in terms of picking up that information. It starts about 30 feet. So they get about 30 feet of, heads up, in terms of, you're coming toward this ramp, and you need to keep going straight in order to get to your classroom. So it's been nice. Anything else?
Any questions from the group?
Mason?
Go ahead, Amy.
How close do you have to be to their perspective? I mean, how specific and exact does this have to be?
It doesn't have to be that exact. And to giving you an example is one of the keys that I set for my students was to walk up the ramp. Now, every time, as soon as she walks in the building, I would say that there's 50 feet from the inside of the building to that ramp. And the market or the target is actually set at the ramp, and it will actually go ahead and pick that up at 30 to 60 feet away, and they'll start getting your information about that. Now, I did notice that in the building, some of my cues or my landmarks that I've set are affected by light or the time of the day. And so I did have to change the way I set my landmarks, being that when I'm walking up that ramp, I wanted to make sure I included a physical landmark, that I would pick something that's always there, and it's this trash can that's over on the right-hand side. So as long as I was able to cue that one trash can that's consistent and stays there and is anywhere from, I'd say, 36 inches. So you're talking 36 inches from, because the child's wearing it on her chest, probably about sternum level. I've got to get 36 inches above and 36 inches below that in terms of a target. But even that target will set off being that if she's further away, as she comes up, you imagine the further away you are, the larger your field of view is. And so it's still picking it up and giving her that information, whether she's on top of it or not on top of it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Great.
Okay, Andrea.
Okay, so that's a little bit about how I'm using the look text recognizer. And the reason that I picked that specific app is because it didn't require that Wi-Fi access, and it didn't require GPS. The other app that I'm using, again, for outdoor orientation and mobility, and even indoor orientation ability, is that Text Detective. Text Detective is pretty much advertised as an OCR app, being that, you know, if you take a picture of text, it's supposed to scan it for you and give you back that text. And I really prefer a different app for that main purpose called Prismo, but Text Detective actually has some real value as an OCR program. And how I'm using that specific app, again, because that app doesn't require Wi-Fi access. And because it doesn't require GPS signal, I'm using that app to find information about signs in the building. Whether I'm looking at the sign that says the men's room or the girls' room. And this is only because some of my students aren't, because Haley is not consistent enough to be a Braille reader. She can figure out the first letter to determine girl's name, but, you know, targeting that sign is a little difficult for her. But with the Look-Tel Recognizer, what I'm finding is that if I'm facing a sign and I hold it up, because it has a technology where you actually don't have to take a picture of something, it'll actually scan the area in which the camera is pointed on. It's picking up signs for me indoors. So it'll tell me what door I'm facing. It'll tell me by the room number. It'll tell me the number of that. And I find that it's actually working outside. So when I'm outside with my students, say boxing an intersection or teaching them, you know, how to familiarize themselves with an intersection, we're actually using that, you know, Text Detective as a cue and say, okay, I know that you were at a stop sign controlled intersection, and I know that you think that we're at, say, Elm and, you know, Pine Street. Where do you think that the street signs are going to be? And they're usually going to point toward a target. And as long as I'm able to stand approximately within 6 feet of that sign, and it's actually worked is I can actually stand across the street at some locations, depending on the lighting, and it's not perfect, but it's giving me information about signs. What's in my area? What street am I at? Because it reads street signs. Probably it reads street signs the best in terms of text. And I've tried. It doesn't do text in terms of I tried to use it to take pictures of a menu and be able to have it read back to me what was on that menu. And I found that it just wasn't good enough in terms of that. But what it really is good at is reading signs. And so in terms of being outside and having an iPod or an iPad, because my students don't usually have the ability to have iPhones, which we give them 3G, but they do have that. And so we're using that camera and that camera feature to teach them how to target something, to teach them what's in their area, to have them actually make those series of quarter turns and figure out what print is in my environment, what might be here in relationship to me. Can I confirm where I am in terms of street signs? And I found by looking this Look-Tel, using this Text Detective, that yes, my students can figure out whether or not they're at the intersection they need to be, as long as they're able to find that street sign or point their camera in the direction of the street sign, and it picks it up for them without having to touch that camera and or take a picture. So in terms of instructional-wise, what am I using it for? Well, I'm teaching them to aim their camera towards something, spotting, much like you would with a monocular. So as I'm outside, Text Detective is almost taking the place of monoculars for some of my students, because monoculars are a little challenging to use, and they definitely reduce your field of view, and it's hard to find that pole and then track up and then confirm the sign. But using the Text Detective, your field of view is expanded, and you're able to just kind of move it until you hear the sign, and it will read back to you what you have, and it works with voiceover. And so I found that to be real valuable instead of taking, you know, another resource for my students, you know, saying, hey, if you can't really confirm where you are, what's another tool that you could use? And we're saying, yeah, Text Detective can be a really good tool outside to confirm whether or not I'm at my right location, whether or not I'm facing the building, as I was at the Summa conference, I was actually able to aim it at my hotel, and it was reading, the hotel signs to me, which I thought was pretty good. But the reason I use that is just because it doesn't require Wi-Fi, and all that stuff is built in, and it's becoming an orientation tool for my students that I thought was important enough to kind of share with you guys. And did you guys have any questions about maybe Text Detective or how that's working?
Debbie Gillespie?
Yes, Debbie.
My question is, what is the field of radius for Text Detective if you're outside, and how do you teach kids to work with it, say, if they're using their iPod with an armband?
Okay. Their iPad with an armband. If they had their iPod as an armband, that would restrict the camera, because when you put those on the armband, the camera's flipped around most of the time, so they're actually having to take it off. My students have their iPod, not in an armband, but around their neck, as I mentioned, which is kind of how they're carrying it for their Locale recognizer. For Text Detective, in terms of the field of view, I would say, if I had to give you degrees and I was pointing it, you probably have about 20 degrees central view. So if you're holding it directly in front of you, it's going to give you about 20-degree field. In terms of saying, how close do I need to be to a sign in order to recognize that? Well, my answer would be, the closer the better. That's what usually works the best. And in terms of helping my students target them, I'm still going through all of the normal things that you would do in terms of teaching orientation mobility skills to our students, in terms of saying, what kind of street furniture do we have on corners, and where is that typically located? Where are signs typically located? Were you able to find that, sign? And if that street sign isn't on this particular corner, which corner would it be? And so standing on the corner, we're again making quarter turns directly in front of us, and it will take pictures of the street signs. Actually, the best target that I found is between the stoplights. So if I'm at a stoplight-controlled intersection, it's a little easier for my students to say, yeah, I know that stoplight's going to be in front of me. And so if I have my students actually take their iPad or iPod, and it seems a little silly, and I have them pick it up and rotate it so that the camera is actually located on the left top-hand corner, and then in a horizontal view, because that's the way Text Detective works. It's actually called landscape view. And the way I teach landscape and portrait is one person wide or two people wide. And so they're kind of conditioned into the what's portrait and what's landscape meaning in terms of what the sighted guide looks like. If I'm walking with someone's sighted guide and I'm their guide and they're walking next to me, I tell my student, oh, this is called landscape view. We're two people wide. But if I swing my arm behind me and we have to go through a narrower space like a doorway, I'm saying this is one person's wide. This is called portrait view. And so I'm able to interpret that, I'm able to incorporate that, something that they're already familiar with, like landscape or portrait view, in terms of helping them orientate their camera. And as long as they take their iPod and they kind of touch it to their nose first, which that's what I tell my students, because they're really poor in terms of spatial body concepts at this particular point. But if we touch it to their nose and we straighten our arms out, we have a pretty good field of view that we're going to hit that stop sign. That stop sign that's about, or not stop sign, but that street sign, which is about 6 feet away, and or it might be 2 feet away if it's directly in front of me, but the camera's picking that up. And so that's how I'm using it. And again, it's sort of an app that I'm saying, hey, if you're not quite sure where you are, or you need more information about where you're at, that what are your other ways? And so I'm saying to them, tell me an app that you would use for O&M. And those are kind of how my IEP goals are written. If you're lost, if you don't know where you're at, what could you use? What do you have in your pocket, like your iPod, that can give you information about your environment? And they'll pick out the Locale recognizer, and or Text Detective is one of the apps that I'm probing for them to look for that kind of information. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Curtis,
did anyone else? Yes, Curtis. How can I help
Andrea, hi. So my question is, so if you take a student who has mastered the use of these tools, and so they're outside, and on a typical travel day, they do wind up someplace where they don't know where they are. Have you determined how long it typically will take using this text detective to get useful information? Does it take 2 minutes? Does it take 5 minutes? Does it take 10? How long does it usually take?
I would say that it usually takes about 5 minutes, provided that if they've already been trained on how to use it and they can orientate the camera, and I could say that, yes, Alana knows how to, and I could say, yeah, Haley knows how to, but I would speak more towards someone like Tony, who's already an adult. He's 29. What am I? Call me up, and so I run lots of my apps past him, and it takes him about 5 minutes to target it. But Tony's a little different, being that he's had sight, or at least low vision in the past. So yeah, he's familiar with kind of how things look like when he faces a intersection, and so yeah, he's a lot more successful. And it takes him about 5 minutes. Now, for Haley, it would probably take her about 10, and that's just because I'm dealing with processing issues. And I won't tell you that the text detective works every single time, because I'll tell you, it's not perfect, and I haven't found any app that really is perfect, but I can say that once they pull out the text detective and they're able to target it, they will get information about something that they're pointing their camera out within about 5 minutes. It takes about the average bird to process about 2 minutes, a little faster, but once you drag your fingers up to voiceover, it's a little longer. I haven't really tracked it in terms of time. I know that I haven't spent a whole lot of time doing it. I'm interested to see how you guys might all use it, what you think about it later, and whether it might be effective for adults. But, as an educator, I have a lot more time. And so I kind of sit there and wait and say, tell me when it picks it up. And it's a learning experience of how to use the app, and also an experience of where that street furniture is and whether or not they can target their camera. But in terms of actual data and how long it takes for them, I really can't give you a concise amount of time, just because I just haven't been tracking it in terms of time for them. Sorry, I wish I could answer your question better.
First, just a quick question. Was your question specific to Text Detective, or did it also apply to Recognizer?
No, not Recognizer. I was thinking you're outside and you're temporarily displaced. So you're trying to figure out where you are and how long would it take to figure it out in a typical environment. And what you're saying is 5 minutes, but unknown at the moment, because we need a larger base of users to get more data. That's
I would really need, you did, and you heard me correct, I would really need a larger base of users, but, yes, and the only thing that I would say about that particular app is I think that probably an adult user would be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. It would take them less time, but, based on the population that I'm teaching O&M to, I've got all the time in the world, you know what I mean? So I really haven't taken that data into how fast they could be, because I'm still teaching my students how to aim a camera, you know what I mean? And where that street furniture on the intersection is located. And so as I'm using it, we're really using that app more as like an intersection, exploring an intersection and learning about that intersection, as opposed to I'm almost lost and I need to find my place. Now, look how Recognize, where I'm dropping kids off and saying, okay, you're lost. Go figure out, where you are and how to get back. And I've had lots of success with that. But in terms of my instructions, what I've used Text Detective first for is more of exploring your environment, learning about your environment. And so, yeah, in terms of data time, I'd love to know what you come up with, Curtis, because it would, I think most of us, all of us, should be working on a lot of these same apps to figure out how effective it's really going to be. And I'm only one person, so I'm just happy to share it with you and see what you guys take from it and, come out later with it on how well or how effective it's going to be.
And are the kids wearing earbuds or anything so that it's easier to hear the speech when they use this?
Actually, my students use the Aftershock headsets. And the reason that they're using the Aftershock headsets is because it keeps their ears open. And they're the bone conduction technology. So as we're out there and they're listening, their ears aren't blocked by earbuds. They're wearing the Aftershock headsets, which mount, over top, actually on their temples, so that they're hearing it vibrate through their ears. So they're still able to survey traffic. They're still able to hear me. And that's kind of how I'm using it, because I have a real problem with kind of putting earbuds in a kid's ears when I expect them to analyze an intersection. So I found that those afterthought headsets have been really good in terms of giving my students the ability to listen to what their GPS is saying, listen to voiceover, and still attend to me and or the traffic. And so that's what I'm using.
Thank you.
Sure. Are there any questions about the text detective before I kind of move on to the next one?
Debbie Gillespie?
Yes, Debbie.
Last question. I'm assuming the time that you're speaking about for analysis, 5-10 minutes or whatever, is based on 4S or 5. I'm also assuming, rightly or wrongly, you can correct me, that if it's an iPhone 4 or an iPad 4, that time would be increased based on the camera megapixels?
You know, I have taken it out, and I tested this app with my iPad 3. Tested it with an iPad 2, and I tested it with the iPod. I would say that it's not the recent one, but the version from last year. And I could say that based on the megapixels of the camera, I really haven't found it to be any more successful with a better megapixel camera and a worse megapixel camera at this particular time. I think, in my opinion, having using the app, it seems to be a matter of proximity, where you have the camera targeted toward, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job of detecting it using either the iPad 2, the iPad 3, or a regular standard iPod with a camera. But I'm not sure the version that they had. I think when I first bought the iPods, they were like 5.1. So they're just from last year. So they're not antiquated, but they're pretty recent. Does that answer your question?
It does indeed. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. With that, unless there's any other questions about that text detective, I'd like to move into another app called Digit Eyes, if you guys are all want to hear about that one next. All right. So since I haven't heard anything on the ideas of indoor orientation mobility, and since I discussed the Look-Tell Recognizer and Text Detective, the next one I wanted to kind of talk about was Digit Eyes. And I'm not sure if any of you have had experience with Digit Eyes, but I love Digit Eyes. I think it's great in terms of being a really nice app that will allow you to do your barcode scanning and really gives accurate information about how. Now my mic's starting to echo back at me, sorry. But, so yeah, I find it to be excellent in terms of a good barcode scanner. It pretty much has the largest database around there in terms of picking that up. So I can literally walk into pretty much any grocery store and scan a barcode and have it give me some pretty good, accurate information about what that object is, how many pounds it is. I mean, it's overly detailed as to how much information you get about the product. It does require Wi-Fi access, which is kind of a downfall with shopping, but works really great on my iPhone or with my kids' iPods. And yes, instead of when I'm traveling with my students, I always have a hotspot with me. So if we need to connect to the internet, they always do. But the thing that I'm using Digit Eyes for, in terms of orientation mobility, is with Digit Eyes, the magic really happens on their website. And I don't know if any of you have been to their website, but it's phenomenal. You are actually able to go to their website, log on with a free user account, and you can create your own barcode scanners. So your own barcodes. And so how am I using those? Well, I'm using those, again, for orientation mobility, for my route travelers. And typically what I would usually do in the past is I would set up those tactile markers within the building. So, I mean, I might have like a piece of carbon square that might be, Miss Langello's classroom, or I might have, something else, a sandy piece of paper by the art room as a tactile marker for some of my other kids. But now what I'm able to do is I'm able to go ahead and actually go onto their website and print out barcodes. And so I'm giving barcodes, I'm putting barcodes instead of tactile markers. And I still have my tactile marker up because I'm teaching them to kind of identify things. But I'm also putting up barcode scanners, barcodes from the Digit Eyes website. And the reason that I'm doing that is because, number one, I want to teach my kids how to aim their camera. Because with digit eyes, you can actually point it. So as long as they're able to target, I'm using it as a targeting tool. Because, they know where their tactile marker is. Yeah, they know where it is. They're able to aim their camera at it, whether it, be hanging from the neck or actually holding it out. Usually if I'm having my children take a picture of something or hold it out, I have them find their tactile marker first, touch it, and pull it back about 6 inches so it'll go ahead and find the barcode scanner. But with a barcode scanner, I can program what I want that barcode to be, and it can give me as much or as little information as I want it to give. So I'm using it for my lower students in terms of tactile markers are important, but a carpet square isn't necessarily real life, and it's not going to tell you about where you are or where you're not at. But what I can do is I can set those barcodes, and the barcodes that tell me this is Mrs. Langella's room. It could tell you that your desk is straight in the door and to your right. I'm setting that in terms of, again, open spaces. And with some of my seniors, not just my seniors, but I'd say high school students, they know where the barcodes are. So when they get into an open space and they need more information, they know where to go and to find more information, being that, they just have to find their barcode scanner. And if they scan it, it can tell them, well, you're in this intersection, and if you go to the right, it'll take you down to the nurse. If you go to the left, it'll take you down to the art room. If you go straight, it'll take you to the office. If you, go behind you, it's going to take you back to your classroom, which has been really meaningful. In terms of the other things that I can do with that is we're actually using it to label some of their folders. So my kids will have information, instead of just putting a Braille label on it to say, hey, this is your poem folder, I can actually go ahead and set a barcode piece of paper, put it inside their folder and say, this is your poem folder, and it'll tell them the order. So I can create tables of contents. I can create information about different files or different folders that they have them and where to find that. So I found it to be really great, not just as our barcode scanner for like their daily living, whether or not they're in the life skills classroom and whether or not they need to go ahead and find the milk, they're able to go ahead and actually confirm objects by using their barcodes. But I'm able to create lots of different barcodes for different reasons, whether that's file identification, whether I'm using that for orientation and mobility. I'm actually creating barcodes, just in terms of sequencing, and so I think that Digitize is really excellent, not just for their ability in terms of being a barcode scanner, and that's our main purpose for it, but in terms of what we can actually do. And I think that, if we think about apps a little differently in terms of not just what they're advertised for, but how we can use them in different ways to make people's lives great, I think that's pretty important, and I just think that they've been doing a great job. Any other questions about, has anyone been on Digit Eyes? Does anyone have a preference about Digit Eyes?
Andrea, it's Rob. Question: are you using the QR codes from the website to label the environment for the children outside of the school, like at the intersection of Pine and Elm Street? Could they recognize that using Looktel Recognizer? And part of that instruction would say there's a barcode above the button for the signal light, or words to that effect?
I could. I haven't done that yet, just because I would have to laminate them, and I'm kind of worried that if I go out into the environment, if they're kind of posting things, that they're not going to be able to find them again, because it's something that I have to adapt the environment for. I really do go ahead and use that Looktel Recognizer on those intersections for outside as well, being that if I'm at a specific intersection and that intersection also has a newspaper, stand where they buy their newspapers for, I'm targeting those intersections based on key things that my students will contact in their environment. So as they're walking down, that Looktel Recognizer is going to pick up the fact that they're at, Pine and Elm Street before they actually get to that intersection. And the Looktel Recognizer doesn't just do that. It works out great in terms of, like Digit Eyes does in terms of a barcode scanner. I'm not using it as a barcode scanner because barcode scanners are, barcode scanners are kind of hard to find, and they're not always in the same place on every single object. And so it does make it more challenging for someone with a visual impairment to say, how do I orientate this? How do I find this barcode? And things like that. So with the Looktel Recognizer, it's really nice to be able to take a picture of Kraft macaroni and cheese, because the Kraft macaroni and cheese box rarely changes. So every time they hold it up, no matter if it's that macaroni and cheese box or another macaroni and cheese box, it's still going to read me that same information. The same way it's going to tell me that same information whether I'm outside, whether I'm inside. But how I'm using that digital eyes for indoor orientation mobility in terms of setting those is really based on indoor orientation and mobility, and for the idea of how do you aim your camera, how do you use your camera in terms of teaching my students to make adaptations later for their materials that they're going to get and how to convert things. So that's primarily the reason that I'm using Digitize. I really value their website, but yeah, I could go ahead and set barcodes at different intersections. But then I would kind of be dependent on whether or not I have Wi-Fi access. So it's been more successful in the building that I'm at because I do have Wi-Fi access, whereas I'm outdoors. Hi, Curtis.
Hi. Okay, so I have a question related to the Digitize and beyond. I think it's really cool what you're talking about, the ability to create custom labels. So for your advanced students, are you working with them on how to do it themselves so that they can make labels and label their own items? Because, to me, that's the beauty of the Digitize thing.
Absolutely.
Because the program falls down for commercial products, because if you don't know where the barcode is, you take a whole lot longer to find the barcode. But being able to uniquely identify items yourself and make a label and then put it on there, so once you know where the label is, you can identify it. That, to me, that's what you started talking about when you talked about Digitize. And in the right context, I think that's really a very powerful tool, because it's fast and it works pretty well.
Yeah, it is really fast, and you don't have to aim the camera. It pretty much takes it for you. And so, that's exactly what I'm doing with it. Yeah, I am teaching my more advanced students how to get on the internet and create their own labels. In addition, with some of my adult clients that I'm working with, you can actually go on their website, and they will sell you labels, like 20 labels for like $20. And you can label your clothes with them, and they sew into your clothes. And so, a couple people, older adults that I've talked to are actually creating their labels for their clothes. And, they'll send it back to them, and they just take it down to not a laundromat, the seamstress or whatever, to have them put on there for them if they're not sewing them on themselves. But we're using it to label their clothes as well. I'm using it to label your kitchens. I'm using it to label your office. I'm using it to label your workspace, as well as your barcode scanner out there. So, their website is huge. And I think the app is excellent outside of just being able to identify like groceries and or shopping. So I'm doing exactly what you said with it.
So, Andrea, there's two ways you can do that. You can print off the QR codes that are associated with information that you've stored on their database, in which case anyone scanning that would get that information. But you can also use them much like the Pen Friend, where a different type of QR code can be printed. And then when it's scanned for the first time, you can do either an audio recording, which is stored locally, not requiring Wi-Fi, or with text locally, not requiring Wi-Fi that VoiceOver will translate.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, that has to be the third. Digitize is profound. But again, Digitize is one of those that requires a Wi-Fi signal. So if you don't have Wi-Fi, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. But Looktel Recognizer or Text Detective will. And so all three of them, I think, are excellent applications in terms of maybe using what they're designed for a little differently in order to meet your needs. So, when I think of Digitize, I think of, going ahead and getting me a scanner that's going to, tell me what clothes I'm going to wear and stuff like that. And those are like $200 systems, and Digitize is $19.99, and you can print out and make whatever you want. So it's profound. It saves a lot of money, when you're trying to label stuff. And it definitely helps my students in terms of learning what the camera is. How do you aim that camera? Where do you need to point it at? So, in terms of concepts that it teaches my students dealing with younger students, it's a pretty great app for me in lots of different ways. But I think it has a lot of uses out there in the community for adults as well. And so I hope all you guys.
Just to mark time, we have about 21 minutes remaining.
So does anyone have any questions about Digitize? Kind of before I move on. No more questions? Okay. The other one I wanted to talk to you guys about, and I think that you probably all heard about it, is VizWiz. And VizWiz is a great application, being that you just have to take a picture of it, and it gives you the ability to go ahead and use their online intersection or online Wi-Fi, and you have to connect with a real person. And they do let you use their database and or connect with a real person. So they have a pretty expansive database. So what did I do with it? Well, I wanted to see how well it was going to work and what kind of questions I could ask, and I started taking pictures of, silly things. I got to take a picture of a television, and my question would be, am I looking at a television? And with the pictures that I'm taking, not only am I getting it verified from their web database, but also from a real-life person. So how does it help my students, and how am I using that for orientation mobility? If they need extra confirmation from, someone, and I'm not there, they can always take a picture, and they can use it as a backup. And VizWiz is one of my backups, and says, if you think you're facing, the cafeteria, or not necessarily a cafeteria, but, a place that you want to go, a hair salon or whatever, and you're out, and you have Wi-Fi access, you can ask a pedestrian, to help you, and that would always be my first course, but there's not always people that are around. So VizWiz has been, instrumental in terms of, provided that you have Wi-Fi, you can really take a picture of anything, and ask a question. And I haven't gotten back an answer of, I don't know, or that's not within our database. Whether or not I'm taking a picture, of a street sign and saying, hey, can you tell me if I'm at Pine Street? Does it say Pine Street? They're coming back and going, yeah, it is. So I don't know what they're doing down there at VizWiz, but I know that, they're a nonprofit down there, but they're really providing an excellent service for everybody. And I think it's important that, they are at open source. And yeah, their app is free, and they're asking for donations for, can we support their project and keep them going? And I would say that, based on the information that I've gotten, I think this is a profound app. And I think it gives a lot of people a way out in terms of, if I'm not quite sure where I'm at, I can take a picture. And if everything else fails, I can send it to them, and hopefully I'll get an answer. And I'm finding that 99% of the time, I'm getting an answer back from them of, yeah, you're looking at a television, or yes, you're facing the right building, or yes, you did take a picture of that address sign, and it says that you are at, house 121. So I'm using it for orientation mobility as well, VizWiz, just as kind of confirming where I'm at and giving my students the ability of, how do I get more information? And then I teach them, what can you do on your own first? And, well, you could check your locale recognizer, you could check text detective. I use VizWiz, and that's another way to confirm. So it's not a whole lot, because the app is pretty much self-explanatory in terms of, you take a picture and you ask a question, and they give you an answer back. And I think that they've really done a good job in terms of giving my students the ability to say, I'm not quite sure, I needed someone to give me maybe some sighted assistance, and but I can always ask this app, and they're going to give me an answer. And I found it to be a really nice app to use, and that's kind of how I'm using it. I mean,
I listen to a lot of this, and I wonder, how clear does the focus have to be? How spot on do you have to be? Are you using vision to aim at these things and give these tools a description, or are you sort of taking a blind person's shot and hoping that's good enough?
I've done both. In terms of VizWiz, yes, I've taken a picture myself. But then again, when my students are there and I say, do you want to confirm something? Yeah, my instructions to my student is, if you know where the target is and you're not sure what it is, and you want to, we have them touch it with their iPad, and we back up about 2 feet, and then we take a picture. And that picture has been good enough, and for VizWiz to say, yeah, you're looking at this sign or whatever. But I mean, you're touching the object first and backing up about 2 feet, maintaining that same level, and taking a picture of it.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of the mystery out of it then for blind people. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes the mystery out of, just rapidly aiming and trying to take a picture. I mean, you physically have to walk up and touch it and say, I'm not sure what that is. Let's back up about 2 feet and take a picture, and even with their pictures, and some of them have been pretty poor. I've gotten some really good data out of it, and like I said, I've gotten the only thing that I've ever got with it is, can you ask your question again? You know what I mean? Of them not understanding what my students had asked, and that's the only thing that I've gotten back from VizWiz in terms of saying, ask your question to us again, because they didn't quite understand it. The way that I found it to work with VizWiz is it first goes through their database, and if their database can find it, they'll give you an answer. If not, the information, that picture actually goes to a physical person that's actually sitting over at their computer who's there waiting for my picture to come through and goes, yep, that's exactly what you're looking at. So we're getting sighted assistance from another end. So we're at VizWiz, which I think is great. You know what I mean? That there are people on call that are able to help us out and, confirm that information for us.
Rob,
Curtis John.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm thinking about this remote assistance thing, Andrea, as a VizWiz, I take it, is a snapshot camera versus Looktail recognizer, which is more of a real-time video, if I understand how that works correctly. And Looktail recognizer, of course, doesn't have a person on the backside. But as I look toward the future, one of the things that occurs to me is now that we've got the 4S and the 5 out iPhone-wise, and the newer generations of the iPad and iPod with iOS 6, the new thing that's now coming along is the ability to do FaceTime communication over a 3G network, right?
Yes.
And so, as I understand it, you can correct me, VizWiz right now is you take a snapshot, you try to, it goes against the database. If that doesn't work, a human being will respond and say, yeah, that was good. But think of the future. If you could have a real-time interface where you could go back and forth, because a lot of times you're not necessarily sure, and I'd like to have a way, if it was me looking at this, I'd go, the person might say, look left, look right, because you're still not getting it, because sometimes you're in a situation where you need that kind of interactive view, and today that's not possible without, but I'm looking at FaceTime thinking, on the road, we could conceive, how the...
I think FaceTime is an awesome idea. You know what I mean? I haven't really quite implemented FaceTime yet. And I've tried it. I have a 5G new iPhone, and I have Sprint service. And I don't know if it's a problem with the Sprint service or my iPhone itself, but I'm not able to do Skype calls without a Wi-Fi signal. And in terms of FaceTime, I think that you're going to have a Wi-Fi signal for that as well. When I try to do FaceTime with 3G, I'm not really that successful. It seems to me to be more Wi-Fi based. Have you had different experiences? Is 3G working for you?
I'm looking toward the future, because right now I don't see FaceTime as a viable alternative unless both parties are on iPods or iPads and you're both on Wi-Fi. But, they did announce with iOS 6 that if you had a 4S or higher, and I gather certain, the problem with FaceTime is it's still infant yet. It's still not quite there. But it seems to me that whatever method we think about where you get a person on the other end, it's got to be more than a snapshot picture. It's got to be, if I'm thinking about the ideal, what I want is a video interface that is interactive while I'm talking to somebody on the other end. Me personally, I'm happy to pay for that service if I can get it. I don't use it that often, but it seems because so much of what you're doing is, especially if you're older, this is beyond the kids thing, but you're working, you're in a hurry, you got to get something done. You may not have an assistant around all the time, and it would be nice to have a service available, I think, where you could have real-time video where you could get all kinds of stuff done if it were there. But right now, FaceTime isn't quite there yet. Now, I figure in another couple of years it'll be there, and then we can look at this again and see where we are. Because, you're right on the cutting edge. You're trying all kinds of new stuff, which I think is pretty cool.
Rob Nevin. I got Andrew, a question concerning VizWiz. Is it of any benefit to a blind user facing an appliance with a digital display?
Yeah, I haven't checked out in terms of like a digital display saying asking someone on VizWiz to orientate me in terms of what the layout is. I haven't tried that yet, but now that you ask, I will. But no, I haven't really gone there. I mean, I can take in a picture of an appliance, and VizWiz will say, you're looking at a microwave, you're looking at a stove, you're looking at whatever that appliance is. I mean, it's good in terms of telling me that. It does tell my students what appliance they're actually at, which tells me that, yeah, and that's not coming from a sighted person. That's coming from their database. So, yeah, their database is pretty good. They can tell me what a coffee pot is based on all the different coffee pots. Well, I think that's pretty great. But that's my perspective. So, I mean, in terms of a digital display and having VizWiz tell me the layout of that, no, I haven't tried that yet. But now that you ask, I will.
Yeah, I'm thinking more from the perspective of changeable information. It's not going to come from the database, but actually from the human's point of view. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, Debbie.
Question, go back to Curtis's comment regarding FaceTime and VizWiz. I don't see it even 2 years further. I see Siri interacting with your video on your iPhone and actually linking FaceTime, Siri, iMessage, and the other components of your phone, so that right now it only works in the audio mode, but you probably could ask Siri at some point. I'm going to give it a year out, maybe, the way things are going, year and a half at most, that you could ask Siri, for instance, if you have a 4S or above, am I looking at the sign? Is it show? Could you read me the next sign? And it would integrate with FaceTime and your camera. I can see how that could work. I'm not sure how to go about it, but I can't see why it wouldn't. If,
I think we should all get together and, plan something just like this, and we can make millions of dollars. It's a great idea. I mean, if I knew how to write apps, I would be all over it. But yeah, I can see exactly where that technology is coming from, and I'm hopeful that it comes. You know what I mean? And I think it's great that we're all thinking together for the same things. And I'm excited about where the iOS technology is going. And my position with the iOS technology is I start kindergartners out and with iOS devices and a refreshable braille display. And I use the refreshable 18 because I like it. And it's small and it's about the size of your, iPad, which I find to be portable. That's my idea of portable. Also, I'm a little biased as a teacher, being that it's available free on federal quota. So if I can get this is the first time ever, for me, that I've been able to get a braille display free on federal quota. And I can tell you that the refreshable 18 has changed in the last 2 years my level of instruction with my students. And I can also say that based on this, this kindergartner that I started out with the iPad or the iPod and the refreshable braille display, it's the first time ever that I've actually been able to teach a child who is blind how to read instead of what braille is. Because they're reading the same pace as their sighted peers. And it reminds me again of that story. If you give a mouse a cookie, or you give a moose a muffin, what will they do? Well, if I give a blind kid, who's in kindergarten an iPod, what will she do? And I can tell you exactly what she do. She fills out all her worksheets. She reads everything on her braille display. We get everything via NIMAC. She exchanges information. She emails her teacher. She watches VeggieTales. She surfs YouTube. And I can say as a teacher that if my student who's 6 years old or 7 years old right now can come to my house and hang out with my 7-year-old who's a sighted child and read as fast as she can and do exactly the same as my sighted kid can do, then I've done a pretty good job. I'm ecstatic about it. You know what I mean? Really happy. And I think that's
has the Refresher Braille 18 and the iPod increased your Braille literacy of your students? I mean, how they learn Braille? Is that how they're learning Braille now, or do they already know Braille?
No, she's learning Braille. We learned Braille on it, and I'll tell you, it's been profound. I mean, because one of the problems that I deal with, as a teacher, well, tracking is a huge issue. Maintaining that line with a single space and or a double space, well, now I only have 18 cells to deal with. And so she tracks and she's right on. And the scrubbing has decreased because Braille is always fresh and it's not flattened. And if she doesn't know a contraction, she knows how to flip it into non-contracted and spell out the word to herself and go, oh, that's that word. And, it's been huge. And where can I say that my now first grader is? Since she was in kindergarten, and I introduced her last year. And I'll tell you what, she was proficient using VoiceOver and the iPod and the refreshable braille display in 4 months. which I could say she's a prodigy. I'd like to think she's a prodigy. She's smart. She's a smart girl. And, but she's doing profound things. And it's really nice as a teacher to say that if the regular ed classroom teacher hands out a worksheet to everyone in our class, she tells my student who's visually impaired, go find this worksheet. And what do? We get on AI Writer. She opens up the worksheet by name. And then she reads the information with her sighted peers. And she fills out that same worksheet, just like her sighted peers on there. And that information syncs directly to the teacher's laptop using Dropbox, because we have a seamless system. Whoever goes from my iPad goes into her iPod, goes to the teacher's desk. So it's seamless. And how else is it helping? It's helping these regular education teachers profoundly, being that, as my students who are visually impaired or blind are reading their Braille, what do regular ed teachers know? Absolutely nothing about Braille. And so when I'm not there, they're saying, I don't really know this word. And the teacher's like, okay, show me. So she says, okay, and she presses the router key, and it puts a visual right on the screen of where she is and what word she's having trouble with. And now my teachers, who are regular ed teachers, who don't know anything about Braille, who don't know anything about blind kids, are like able to help them decipher and read Braille, which I think is fabulous. I have a video of last year, which I thought was huge because I had a substitute come into the classroom, and who's never seen a blind kid and doesn't know anything about Braille, and the regular ed teacher wasn't there, but she was supposed to have reading lessons with my child who's blind. And I have the videos of how well they interacted, and I can say that a substitute teacher who came into my classroom who doesn't know anything about someone who's blind, doesn't know anything about Braille, was able to provide reading instruction to my student seamlessly on a one-to-one basis. And I think that's huge.
Rob Nevin?
Yes.
Just to mark time, we have 4 minutes, Andrew.
So anyway, before, I just want to close with one last application that I'm using. And it's not in terms of orientation mobility, it's in terms of OCR software. And we can all think of like Kurzweil and or Open Book. And I have an app that will do what Kurzweil does and what Open Book does, primarily. And that app is called Prismo. And Prismo is an app in OCR software, and the way that I'm using it is to get around those non-readable PDF files. We all get something in our email that we're not able to read, or VoiceOver isn't going to recognize because it's a PDF, it's a JPEG, it's a picture, and it's not going to work. So what do? Well, my students use this application called Prismo. And so if they get a PDF, the first thing we try to do is to see if VoiceOver is going to read it. And if VoiceOver doesn't read it, well, then we take a snapshot. So I bring up the PDF on my screen, and I press the home key and the power key, and I take a snapshot of that PDF. And then what do? I have my students open up Prismo, which is our OCR software, and then we hit text, because we wanted to translate text, and then we hit album, so that my students don't have to target, because targeting, Prismo doesn't have the capability like Looktel does, or the Looktel Money Reader, where it's not going to take a picture for you. You actually have to aim that, picture. You have to line it up in order to extract text, which I hope that they'll change. But right now that they haven't, so it's really developed for pretty much people who are sighted. But yes, it is compatible with VoiceOver, and it does work with VoiceOver. So after we take the screenshot of it, so we've changed the PDF format into like a JPEG format, because that's what, Prismo reads. We go in, I select text, and then I go to the bottom of the screen, I hit album, and I hit the last document, because that's the last thing we took out a screen reader of, and I click use, and Prismo will scan that text, and provided it's on text format, it does it with about 90 to 95% accuracy. So it's saving me as a teacher tons of time in terms of material prep, because I don't have to manually Braille anything. I just take a picture, I have it scanned, and I flip it into Pages, or I flip it into AI Writer, which is huge. But that's what I'm teaching my students to do. I'm teaching my students to say, hey, if you get something in your email, there's a PDF and you can't read it, there's another alternative. What could you do? Well, I've got to change the format. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to take a picture of it, because I teach them about extensions, and so if it's a PDF, I could change to EPUB, whatever, but it's not as consistent, doesn't work as well. But I think that Prismo has been profound for me in terms of saving time and producing materials, but also for my students who want to have that read to them, because some of my students will have many worksheets, and yeah, they could read them, but the reading level is too high. and they really need to have it read to them. So Prisma has been influential in terms of making text accessible to my students, into taking those inaccessible PDF files, and I'm not talking about worksheets, because if there's lots of pictures in it and stuff like that, yeah, it's going to glitch. It's not going to be perfect, but in terms of text recognition, in comparison to Kurzweil, in comparison to Open Book, for $4.99, it's something that I have in my pocket, and it works really well, even if I'm out there and I want to read my menu. I'm in a place and I want to take a picture of what's on the menu. It's scanning that menu for about 90% accuracy. Even when I'm mischarging it still reads me that text. I mean, it's been huge. It's not really great in terms of, I'm not using it for orientation mobility, but in terms of, can you get text? Will it take a good picture of text? And the answer is, how is someone who's blind and doesn't have the ability to actually see and or take a picture? Well, many people will send us pictures, in our email as a PDF and or Word or whatever that is. And anything you get in your email, you can take a snapshot of, load it up into Prismo, and it'll translate it to you with phenomenal, I think, ability to decode what's there. And yeah, there's a little bit of tweaking, but yeah, you can edit it within that file, and you can copy and paste it into any format that you want, which I think has been huge, and that's why I'm kind of closing with that. I mean, I kind of hit on the orientation mobility portion. I know that I get all of my things, but I know I had 2.5 hours over at Soma and only an hour here today, but I do want to mention those, and I do want to mention how influential Prismo has been, not just, for that, but for me as a teacher and how it's impacting my students' life and their ability to adapt things as PDFs and or JPEGs and or Word files and or anything that you get on your iPad or in your mail that you want to be able to read. I mean, even on a website, if, we always use VoiceOver to read their website, but if it's not going to read to us, I can always take a snapshot, and I can always have that decode that, and it always comes back to me with about 90% accuracy. But, 90% I think it might even be like 99, most of the time it's even better, but there are some glitches. What it doesn't do well is limited. So if you're out there, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't if you're trying to read like a menu, and if it's laminated, it has more difficulty. But all OCR programs do.
Rob Nevin? Mm-hmm. Sorry, Andrew, to interrupt. I just want to mark time as the end of our hour. Yep. And I just want to give people license to leave if they need to leave, but also to invite any further questions as this can continue, Andrea, as long as you have a few more minutes.
Sure.
But just to close it off for those that may need to, there's quite a number of applications that were on the list that we didn't get to. But Andrea, I think you did an extraordinary job at targeting the ones that are, as you would express, profound and making a big difference from your experience as well. And I could tell from the questions coming from the group that there was strong interest as well. Part of what I'll do is in the tie down is to, by email tomorrow, is to let's ask if there's any products that we didn't touch on that we could touch on, and if there's any other products that are within the domain of the individuals beyond Andrea and I that should be discussed, be made aware of, that might be beneficial to Andrea in her work, that you could reply to us that way. So, Andrea, I just want to thank you formally, but if there's any questions, we can carry on from here as well.
Well, I only touched on about maybe 4 apps that I use, but I do have, probably 26 or 30 that I've screened, and I do post them on Twitter. So look at it, and if there's anything I do, feel free to give me a call. I'd be happy to help you out.
Debbie Gillespie?
Yes, hi, Debbie.
In the tie down tomorrow, Rob, would you be able to post the wiki and the Twitter, the hashtag, the Twitter ID of Andrea as well, just so we can put it in our lists? Thank you.
Yes, glad to do that.
I have the same question about Skype. I don't really know how to capture the addresses that we have here, but some of these folks would be wonderful to have in my contacts.
I'll send out the list of the participants, Gary, as well as the links to Andrea's information as discussed.
Yeah, feel free, Rob, in your thing to send out my, Skype ID. I'm always pretty much on Skype, so if you guys have a question, I'd be happy to answer them. And I get lots of questions from a couple of different people, many questions from around the world on how different apps work and things like that. And right now I'm just working on refreshable braille displays. Rob has sidetracked me back into the PC world. So now I'm back in the PC world, making JAWS and NVDA and SA to go and all them work with refreshable braille displays. So,
Are there any other questions or comments for Andrea?
Amy Mason.
Hi, Amy.
Andrea, is there any chance, would you mind my passing your information on to, we've got an education team at the NFB, and I think Natalie would be just fascinated by some of what you're doing.
I would love for all of you to pass on our information. That would be excellent. And
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone,
You're
for your
welcome.
participation. Great questions and good reception for all. Thanks again. Today's presentation was by Andrea Bodnari. Andrea is available at the following locations: www.yourtsvi.com, at the wiki www.andreashead.wikispaces.com, or email andrea@yourtsvi.com, or by phone area code 717-278-1795.